What is a hieroglyph? Growing up as a child, I remember watching documentaries and being fascinated by those intrinsic Egyptian characters intended to stand for a sound, an idea, or a spiritual or physical entity such as a divinity or a natural likeness. The Encyclopedia Britannica on its website defines a hieroglyph as, quote, a character used in a system of pictorial writing, particularly that form used on ancient Egyptian monuments. Hieroglyphic symbols may represent the object that they depict, but usually stand for a particular sound or group of sounds. End of quote. The term, etymologically speaking, derives from the ancient Greek word hieroglyphikos, meaning, quote, sacred carving, end of quote. Hieroglyphs were arguably one of the first forms of writing, as discovered by the French Pierre-François Bouchard around 1799 after the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. This seemed to be an effective way for early humans to communicate with each other within their own community. But here's the thing that brings me to speak to you today. Such early engravings were closer to drawings intended to represent, in an abstract fashion, shapes found in nature. Examples of those hieroglyphs resemble the shape of birds, human eyes, serpents, vessels, or even humans. This constituted a significant step further from other preceding attempts at having a system of writing, such as with the Sumerian cuneiform scripts. That being said, hieroglyphs seem to be, in my understanding, very early forms of visual art. There was no need for a specific word to point at or refer to something. Well, just the idea of word is probably not applicable in this context. After all, what we understand as and how we define language today, words, meanings, etc., is the consequence of learning and sharing a common system of communication. But at the same time, the soul engraved depiction of an eye, a bird, or a fish could also symbolize something beyond the concrete object represented and could totally have an existence on its own. Or, when combined, a human with a bird and a fish could totally symbolize something else beyond its original intended meaning when rendered in isolation. Now, back to the definition. Remember, sacred carving. Let's think about it for a second. Sacred indicates that the image rendered is intended to contain a certain level of magical, spiritual, or divine power. And when we state that the image is carved, we are suggesting that it is intended to stay, to be permanent, to persist and function as a message delivered in a present, but also in a future time. A hieroglyph, then, could be taken as a very early form of a symbol. Now, the meaning of a symbol, however, is not universal, but evolved and is interpreted based on time, culture, context, societies, taste, amongst many other things. To identify a symbol, we should be or we must be familiar with the cultural, historical context specific to it. The meaning of a symbol is the result, this is what we're saying, of a long process of forging and embracing complex ideas amongst a specific community. What I am describing here reminds me of how icons functioned in antiquity, particularly in the context of medieval churches, or even more relatable to us with how emojis work today in our contemporary culture. Yes, this is the culture that we are experiencing right now. The use of icons, as with emojis today, suggested that images alone could deliver a story or could tell you a very powerful message in a very straightforward way without a written explanation. Now, how does this introduction connect to the purpose of this channel? My name is Jairo. Yes, Jairo. I have been teaching art history to college students for almost 20 years. I've taught in 3 different countries in all sorts of subjects, but I would say that I am more inclined towards 20th and 21st century art as my main areas of focus. Now, what does this have anything to do with my initial reflection on hieroglyphs? As it turns out, my name is hard to pronounce in English. Along the years, I found that a very effective way to explain to people the accurate way of pronouncing my name was by saying Hiero, as in hieroglyphs. And guess what? It worked like a charm. Fast forward to today, I decided to create this channel as an attempt to have a more direct form of communication with those of you out there who are art history buffs, who have some sort of curiosity in the visual arts, but mostly who are also interested in learning more about today by looking at and connecting with expressions from the past. In an era driven by immediatism, ephemerality, and generative content, I want to foster with your help a space for human connection, creativity, and dialogue. My aim is that both you and I collaborate to make of this a permanent record, a magic carving, a hieroglyph that finds value in our own voice without the disruptions of generative technologies aiming to displace and disempower our ability to observe, imagine, and think for ourselves. I intend to share my knowledge with you, but that knowledge does not belong to me. That knowledge is built in a mutual way and is nurtured by your comments and by your engagement. Welcome to this space where you will learn, I hope, some bits of our history, aesthetics, and visual culture in an engaging, informational, and dynamic fashion. I hope you find this content interesting, but most importantly, accessible and approachable. It is my goal that you find some inspiration in what has been a passion of mine for so many years. Welcome to Hieroglyphs.